This presentation is based primarily on my experience largemouth fishing, and most of my fishing was done Northampton, Monroe, Pike counties, and a lot of the smaller Pocono lakes and pits like Peck's Pond, Promised Land, Shahola.
Peck Pond's way too overgrown.
Oh, it's terrible. It's terrible.
If you don't use 20-pound braid there, don't even fish.
Well, we're going to talk about frog fishing. Frog fishing's pretty cool in those. Yeah, it's pretty good. We'll touch on that a little bit.
I'll tell you, the osprey had better luck than I do that place.
Osprey don't have any problem finding fish, do they?
20 feet from me, took a bass, and I was just working the area.
Sure, sure. The biggest thing about post-spawn bass is where are they located, and I'll just touch on very briefly when largemouth bass spawn, they locate adequate spawning habitat, which most people that have any idea about bass fishing, they know they're going to go to shallow to occasionally moderate depth, gravel, sandy types of flats. Boulder piles, boulder fields with gravel are really good because that provides security and structure for them to use. The males go in and they make the beds. Females come in and do the dance with the male, and the fertilization occurs, and then the fry are born. The fry remain in the nest for, it varies. Sometimes I think on the rivers that I fish, they remain on the nest a little bit less time, but on lakes they can stay there several weeks, a month, maybe 6 weeks or more. And the females, see, I'm going to talk a little bit about when I post-spawn fish, I can go into those flats, moderate depth flats, secondary points, and throw certain lures, and I can catch as many 12 to 15 inch basses as there are, because they're very aggressive. They're guarding the fry, they're very aggressive, very active, they're trying to keep predators away from the babies. Funny thing is, there's a little trivia question. The #1 cause of mortality for juvenile bass is what? The father that's guarding the nest. He eats most of them. Everybody's very concerned about the lizards and the other predators that come in there and eat the fry, but the father actually eats most of his young. So that's an interesting little fact. But that's what happens. You can go into those flats and you can catch as many small to medium-sized bass as possible. Where do those females go? That's what I want to target. Those bigger, 3 to 5 pound bass. They're under a lot of stress and a lot of pressure, and they'll go to recoup. And that's what we're gonna focus on. We're gonna see how we can find those bigger fish. Locations, my top locations. Now there's going to be other locations. I'm just going to target these 6. Secondary lake point. What I mean by a secondary lake point is if you can just picture a cove. The first point that comes out of the cove, if it has adequate cover like wood, deep grass edges, those bigger bass are gonna seek security because they want to recoup. They will eat. That's the key. They will eat. They have to eat. Water temperatures are high. They're burning calories, so they're going to need to eat. So I'm going to target secondary lake points with adequate cover like deep grass edges and wood cover. This is what we were talking about before. When the light is low, when low light penetration occurs, whether it's early morning, late evening, or on an overcast day, locate bait fish pods. Bait fish pods are a magnet when fish want to feed at that time of the year. They will hold on grass edges, on wood cover, on areas like creek channels, bluffs, or grass changes, any place where the grass changes from milfoil to hydrilla or hydrilla to cattails, things like that. That's where those bigger fish are they're gonna head for cover like that. But when you can find bait fish pods during low light situations, again, an interesting scenario that I like to look for when I'm locating bait fish pods. I'll find a pot of bait and I'll go in there, whether I'm throwing a salty shad, whether I'm throwing a topwater lure, a jerk bait. A typical situation, if I see fish feeding, you'll see those fish breaking that bait. You see the bait jumping. On bigger lakes, you see birds feeding on the bait. I'll go in there and my first cast almost always produces a fish. The second cast sometimes produces a fish. Then they're gone. It's like, where did they go?
You spooked the bait.
The bait might be gone. What do you do? What do you do when that happens?
Wait to see the water bubble up somewhere else.
Well, you can do that, or you got to go underneath them. You go underneath them with, you know, if I'm throwing a topwater lure or jerkbait, I'm going to go underneath those fish with a grub or a tube, a drop shot, you know, because I caught the most aggressive fish. That's the way I look at that. And I'll show you that salty shad. That salty shad is a great countdown type of a lure. When the fish are focused upward, I can catch them right on the surface. But when I got those most aggressive fish, I'm going to want to go down below them because those other fish aren't as aggressive. I just picked the most aggressive ones. I know there are more there. I have that mentality. I know there are more fish there, so I have to figure out what they want, how they want it. But bait fish pods are almost always going to hold fish. It's just a matter of defeating frenzy. You know, timing. Timing's key. Timing is a big key. Drop-offs or transitions. Any place. I teach my clients on the river. We have transitions on the river bottom. We call them troughs. If the water's 4 feet deep, a trough might make it 5. It's just a very simple little roll or a little indentation in the river bottom. Classic areas for smallmouth on the rivers. And I like transitions on the lake like a creek channel. Creek channels are key. In man-made lakes, they'll dam the lake. There's always going to be, whether it's a tiny little creek or whether it's going to be a bigger river, there's always going to be a creek channel. And I have it down there, electronics, fish finders versus structure finders. I had my transducer on my jet boat broken 4 years ago, and I have not fixed it because I don't need it on the river. It's nice when temperatures change. I'd like to see what kind of temperature change I've had. On a lake, I absolutely have to have it in this kind of an instance because I want to find structure in these situations. I want to find things like drop-offs, any kind of bottom transition. Transitions hold bass, so you want to try and target anything, again, where the grass changes. You know, just little tips like that, and that's how I'll use my depth finder. If I'm gonna, I don't fish. I've fished very few lakes from my boat. You know, I usually fish from other people's boats when I fish lakes, so they have electronics on them, and we need them out there. You can find fish. It's fine to find fish. You know, they're fish finders, so you can find fish, but it's much better for me to use it as a structure locator because I think if I can find certain types of structure, I can find the fish. Very quickly before I go up on the tank and just demo a couple of these, one of my go-to lures is the case sinking salty shad. The reason why I like the sinking salty shad is because of that second word up there, sinking. A lot of the soft jerk baits on the market are soft. They don't sink. You have to add weight to them. If you want this to sink faster, you can add weight to this. This will sink at such a cool level, and it sinks, when you text pose it or Texas rig it as I have it here, it'll sink parallel. It'll just sink parallel through the water column, and all I'll do is I'll twitch my rod tip, and it'll give that tail. We call it the death rattle or the death quiver. When a bait fish dies, right before it dies, if you take notice, it does a lot of that. It'll dart sometimes, but it'll also just have that little quiver. And all I do is just with a little twitch of the rod tip, I'll get that thing to just quiver. When they're more aggressive, get it darting. It's a lot of fun when you have fish blowing up on an active bait. But when they're not, and post-spawn largemouth bass are typically not as active. High blue skies, high pressure, sunshine. We're going to need to get this bait down to him. He pours this bait with a lot of salt in it, so when they grab it, they hold it, and it adds weight to the bait so it'll sink better. Topwater is a really cool deal, and we were talking about the about real thick grass cover. If you've ever been on a lake like Peck's or Shahola, a lake that has a ton of lily pads. I'll be sitting in a boat and we'll be outside those lily pads and you'll hear that splashing going on back in the grass. It's like, man, oh man, I wish we could get back in there. Frogs are a way to allow you to get back in there if you're willing to beat up your trolling motor and rip up grass and, you know, have it overheat from time to time and all that good stuff. The trick to topwater fishing on lily pads or grass is planing the lure. What I mean by planing the lure, whether it's a frog or a buzzbait, I want to keep my rod tip, when I throw a buzzbait or a frog, I want to keep my rod tip high when that lure hits the water and give it a little bit of a, just raise it a little bit, engage the reel and start the reel instantly, as soon as it hits the water, get it planed. The biggest mistake I see clients on my boat do with a buzzbait is they'll throw that lure, they engage it, whether it's on a spinning rod or a bait caster. I like throwing bait casters for topwaters myself. And they miss that first 10 feet of the retrieve because the buzzbait or the frog sinks. And they're missing the first 10 feet of the retrieve. A lot of times is the most important 10 feet of the retrieve because bass will hit topwater lures. 70% of bass that eat, this is from my experience, 70% of all bass that eat based on a reaction. They react to a bait. So when you throw that buzzbait or that frog in there, get that buzzer buzzing, get the frog legs gurgling as soon as it hits the water because you're going to get a lot of your bites right there. You know, right then and there, they're going to grab that thing. They don't sit there and, that don't look like something I want to eat today. I think that, boom, they're on it. They just grab it. It's just a reaction. They have brains the size of a pea. They don't sit there and think about it too much. You know, so that's the biggest point in topwaters is to plane the lure. And you can throw things like Zara spooks, you know, walking the dog type of baits work just fine. They actually work really well when the fish are under bait fish pods, like I talked about before. Another lure I'll throw is like a popping type of lure, like a Pop R. I use Excalibur's Zell Pop. I throw that typically in anywhere where there's a hole in the grass because they have treble hooks and you're just picking grass all day if you don't. Or off of deeper grass edges, off of areas deeper drop-offs like I had on that previous frame where I said there were bluffs over top of wood. Great, great lure to throw over top of wood. The Excalibur Zell Pop, it's like a Pop R type of a lure, a popping bait. Jigs, any type of a jig, tube, jig and pig. I'm going to profile our little cold water lethargic bass jig there up on the tank. But the trick for jig fishing is, of course, locating the fish. That's why we went over that first. But let the fish dictate how the jig needs to be moved. I've had instances where I'll find a piece of wood and I know there's fish on the wood. I'll drop a jig in there and just my mentality will be, okay, these fish aren't active today. So I'll throw that jig in there and I'll just slowly hop it, almost lift the rod tip, don't do a whole lot with it, and nothing. I'll reel it back to the boat and the fish will chase it. So I know, okay, they want that thing swimming a little bit faster, so I'll change up my retrieve. Let the fish dictate, be flexible with your mentality. That's another thing. I had to get that through my head. I have ideas in my mind for a day based on past experience, and a lot of times those plans don't always come to pass. So I have to be flexible and change up what I know, what I think. Or popping the jig. Quick rod tip. And I also tell my clients on my boat, whether it's smallmouth or largemouth, I'm going to fish, I'm going to let the rod move the jig. I do not, unless I'm swimming it. If I'm hopping it or popping it or dragging it, the rod needs to do all the work. I'm not reeling it to move the jig, I'm popping it. I want to use the rod, that's important. Drop shot I don't do a whole lot of. I had to put it up there because it's one of the top presentations. It's very difficult to do it on the river, so I don't really do much of it because I'm always tying drop shot weights or lures on. It's just really hard to do it on the river. The biggest tip for drop shot fishing is placement of the lure. The weight on a drop shot rig is on the bottom. You tie the weight to the end of the line. So where this weight of this jig is, that's your drop shot weight. Your hook is up here. And you put anything like a reaper bait, a little drop shot style worm, any kind of a finesse bait. What I'll do is I'll try to see how, you know, with my electronics or just by knowing the area, I want to know how high the grass is, so I'll drop that weight down. And if the grass is 12 inches, I want that hook 12 or 13 inches because I want it right at the top of the grass. A couple different things you can do with the drop shot is you can just let it sit there. In the river, it's great because the current will jiggle the lure. In the lake, you got to do it yourself. Two different ways I like to drop shot fish is I will just know that weight's on the bottom and then just a little shake of the rod tip. You don't need to lift it like crazy, or you can lift that rod tip, and what happens when you lift that rod tip is it moves that weight and it drops that lure. It drops it down in his face. If he's on the bottom, it's in his face, and then it's getting away, and then it's in his face, and it's getting away. It sometimes will create a reaction strike from an otherwise lethargic fish. Drop shotting is outstanding. I mean, it's outstanding for really finicky, moody bass. And a yum dinger, a Senko style bait, soft stick worm. It's taken the bass fishing world by storm. I mean, it's an easy bait to fish. In the river, I Texas rig most of them. In lakes, I wacky rig it, and just this is a weighted wacky hook. We actually make this, I'll explain why. I don't know if you can see this, but we use that clear O-ring on there instead of putting the hook directly through the worm, because a lot of small bass grab these. Bluegills grab them. You catch one or two fish, if you don't use the O-ring, it just tears the worm right off. With that O-ring, we can catch a dozen to 15 fish sometimes on one worm. It saves a lot of money. And that wacky tool, that's a tool made by Case Plastics. It's basically, I don't have one here, but you can put the worm inside that tool. You have the O-ring on there, and you just pull that ring right on. That's a really cool little deal. You don't tear your worms up by putting the O-rings on them.
Looks like a hollowed out aluminum base.
That's all it is. That's all it is. Yep. I'm going to go up on the tank just real quickly and throw these lures just to let you see how it's interesting to watch. I have a mentality in my mind. I know how a lure looks. When I see it in the water, it's remarkable how those things, it's like, okay, is that lure standing up? Is it doing what I want? You know. I had a little video clip. Oh, there it is. How about that? It's not big enough, but yeah, it's not big enough for us to see. I wanted to show you how when he casted that buzzbait underneath that tree, a fish blew up on it and he never moved. He just threw it, the fish came up, and he was just like this. He never flinched, he never said, he never moved. The most important thing for topwater fishing is wait till you feel the weight of the fish on your lure before you set the hook. How many times I've done that with a buzzbait and and he missed it. You know, I react just like the fish react to it. You know, I wish this would show a little bit bigger.
What was that last point about the Largemouth jig for stubborn?
Which the weighted jig?
Yeah, it was wacky jig for something, I guess.
For stubborn bass. Yeah. Yeah. That was taken from a shoot we did last year, a TV show.
So what you're saying about this is that you should pause before you react, instead of reacting.
You should wait till you feel the weight of the fish. Yeah. Just, if you're reeling the bait and you see a fish blow up on it, just keep reeling. I know that's crazy. It makes me nuts because it's like as soon as you see the fish blow up, it's like, you twitch, you want to set the hook and drill them. Just do whatever you can to not do that because they may come back on it. They're reacting to it once. They may not react to it a second time, but if they do, and another point on buzzbaits, I'll usually throw a trailer hook on my buzzbaits because you get a lot of really short strikes on buzzbaits. And after I miss 2 or 3, I'll get a trailer hook out and say, I've had enough of that now, I want to catch these fish. I'm going to head up on the tank real quick. First one I'll show you is that little jig I was demoing there. Now this jig, if you watch this at the bottom of the tank, this jig is on a football head. It'll stand like this. And this tail will quiver in the water. So I don't need to move this jig, but this jig still has life at the bottom. I don't need to do anything with the jig. See, now it's on the bottom. I'm not doing a thing to it, but it's sitting down there. It has a little skirt on it, and it adds life. It gives it life. We cut our hooks off so we don't hurt fish. So if I want to get it walking, I'll just very, very slowly lift my rod tip, quiver my rod tip. If you make that jig on a weedless hook, that'll allow you to throw it in thicker cover like grass or wood. That's on a straight hook, so it's going to get stuck on any kind of wood you throw it in. Again, don't fish it. Let the fish dictate the speed of how you want to retrieve that jig. They want it swimming, I'm going to swim it more. I'm going to hop it. Let it fall. Change up what you do with it. That's the key. Let the fish dictate how you fish the jig. This is our case salty shad. Notice how it falls. It falls parallel. I can count that lure down for that reason. I count it down and then give it just a little quiver of the rod tip that gets that tail wiggling. And another point, if I text pose that lure, it's going to dart more. You take notice when I twitch it how it darts. If I nose hook the bait, it's going to have more of a swimming action. You're going to have more, the tail's going to quiver more. It's going to have more of a swimming action. And bass many times will eat a minnow from the head. So if you nose hook the bait, the hook is right there, you're going to catch more of those fish, because a lot of times they will eat it head first. Couple twitches and kill it, and it falls real nice through the water column. And then just a very light twitch of the rod. See, I don't even have my hand on the reel. I'm not reeling. I'm allowing it to fall. If I reel while I'm doing that, it doesn't fall as much. That trout likes it. That's our salty shad. And this is our little weighted wacky yum dinger. Again, I want you to try and focus. It's going to fall weight first. It's a little hard to show here because this water's so shallow, but I want you to try and see how much this thing quivers with that extra weight on it. And once it's on the bottom, you can either walk it across the bottom or you can just lift your rod tip and let it fall again. Looks like Mike stuck all the bass before I got up here. Again, that added weight's going to allow that lure to fall to less active bass, bass that are holding tight to the bottom of grass beds or wood cover. Yeah, it is. I don't know, can you guys see the way that falls? You see the way the ends quiver? It's kind of hard because there's not enough water here to show it, but that's why you want that O-ring. All those little critters grab that thing and tear that dinger right off that hook. With that O-ring, you'll eliminate a lot of baits being torn up.